Hello and welcome to what at the moment of me starting the recording series off is part 1 of 8 of a series on the counties. And yes, this is called the Kent class, but in many ways it should be called the counties, the origin story. And the Kent class is being divided into two, but this does finish when we actually get to the Kent class, so it makes sense it being called the Kent class. It's going to be spread over 5 months, and it's not going to be a quick or an easy one. And most of them, the videos are going to be recorded in the next couple of days, so you're going to be seeing me in Christmas t-shirts for most of this period, and probably the books in a rather similar pile for those next few months. But I'm doing this all together because it's how I felt it best to do it. Because in many ways, this is one rather long essay, rather than just one video, just a series of videos. And it's going to start off with a point which is going to cause a lot of contention. I know it's going to cause a contention. And I'm going in for it anyway. For starters, let's start off with the Hawkins class. If you notice there, this slide comes from Brassey's. And they are detailed as light cruisers. The Hawkins class, the proto ships for which all heavy cruisers were modelled on, all the limitations for cruisers, because in the 1920 Washington Treaty there is no heavy or light cruiser, there is just cruisers and a maximum of 8-inch guns and a maximum of 10,000 tons, because everyone is basing it off the latest cruiser design which the British are building. The Hawkins class light cruisers. The Hawkins class light cruisers. They are not heavy cruisers. They are not what the Royal Navy conceives of for heavy cruisers. The Royal Navy at this time doesn't need heavy cruisers. It has some large armoured cruisers still in service. It's still working out the lessons of World War One. It hasn't built heavy cruisers yet. It's had lots of plans for them, and honestly, we'll be talking about some of those plans in a second, but the fact is they haven't. Now, this starts out with one of the more interesting bits of history, and that people tend to go, well, you know, the Royal Navy stopped building heavy cruisers because they were building battle cruisers, and battle cruisers could beat any heavy cruiser you ever wanted. And originally, once you have the Invincibles, you probably are talking about something which is not wrong. The armored cruiser evolves up into the battle cruiser. But at a certain point, the battle cruisers start to get big enough that they're a problem. And just as you had the light cruisers even when you had the armor cruisers, and you had the scout cruisers even when you had light cruisers, and you could sit there and go, well, this scout cruiser's no point to this one because any light cruiser it meets will annihilate it. And any light cruiser, any armor cruiser it meets will annihilate it. Any battle cruiser it meets will annihilate it. That's the order of the pecking order that usually works. That doesn't mean you don't build the ships. This is one of the interesting things that comes up. Most people go, oh, they're not building heavy cruisers because they've got battle cruisers. And you go, well, no, it's actually because they don't need them at that point. What kind of war are they fighting? If you want something interesting, these are technically termed large Atlantic light cruisers. Courageous class are large light cruisers as well. That's the other question. The thing that's chucked in as well. Oh, well, there's no point building a heavy cruiser if you're building the Courageous class. And I can see your point to that extent, but what do you think you build a heavy cruiser to to do in that? Is my usual return and rejoinder to someone who says that. You'll go, battle cruisers. They are built to fight heavy cruisers. They're built to fight ships which are smaller than them, and anything they can't outrun, they're supposed to be able to outfight. But ultimately, you build heavy cruisers for commerce protection. Really? That is what a heavy cruiser is for. You are building something which you can operate from far smaller, far less capable ports than you might necessarily choose to house a battle cruiser at. You're building for something that can operate, well, some of the earlier design ones, especially the ones of the World War One-ish era, are built to be able to be powered by coal or oil, depending on which they can get their hands on, depending on what the local supplies are. So it's for distant stations. They are built to protect convoys in extent from a battle cruiser, but it's a risk factor. As with any surface raider, and this is what's understood, for starters, should a German battle cruiser have got out into the Atlantic, the Royal Navy has more problems than the battle. There's obviously something far worse gone wrong for them to have got it out in the First World War period. In the Second World War period, again, you can see it when major German surface units get out into the Atlantic. The Royal Navy scrambles everything. The odds on a heavy cruiser end up fighting a enemy, a Scharnhorst or a Gneisenau solo, is very, very low. The odds of them fighting Bismarcks or solo, even lower. But the point is, those ships and R-class battleships and all those things are with convoys because those ships are only viable as long as they can run away. If they're attacking a convoy, they have to come to you. If you're a heavy cruiser and you have torpedoes, you're probably not going to be battered out that of the way that quickly. You're going to be maneuvering, you're going to be at high speed, you've got armor that if you get a glancing blow, you could probably still shake it off and carry on. And you've got torpedoes. Okay, your guns may or may not be able to penetrate their armor at the ranges you're engaging at. In fact, it's probably unlikely. But your torpedoes can cause some trouble. It's a risk factor equation. It's a we can for the given value of cost of one battle cruiser, we can build X number of heavy cruisers. We can build for the given number of a heavy cruiser, we can build X number of light cruisers and it goes down. And you look at them and you ask them, what roles are they for? How expendable are these ships? The really interesting thing is in the interwar period, the heavy cruisers become less expendable because they are more limited, but they also become more limited in terms of their actual ability to do the job of a heavy cruiser because they're not big enough. Limiting them to 10,000 tons is... Oh, and by the way, while doing this research and putting this all together, one of the things that keeps cropping up is some people really do seem to believe that HMS Belfast is a heavy cruiser. She's not. She's a town-class light cruiser with 12 6-inch guns. A ship can be 10,000 tons and still be a light cruiser. Because she's got 6-inch guns. And because of how she's armoured. Because of her other duties. A ship can be 10,000 tons and be a heavy cruiser. In the Hawkins case, well, how do I put this politely? They can be 10,000 tons in standard and have a range of 5,640 nautical miles at 10 knots and a top speed of 31 knots. They can have 70,000 shaft horsepower. But with 7.5-inch guns, and 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, they're not exactly going to be the heavy hitting ship you want them to be. And here's the joke. Okay? So, they considered fitting them with 6-inch guns. That was a considered plan, but that was decided to be too light for the role because these were supposed to be dealing with German commerce raiders, which were mainly converted merchant ships. They had the torpedoes for dealing with anything bigger if it turned up. But they also considered fitting them with 9.2-inch guns, which they chose not to because she couldn't carry as many 9.2-inch guns. But you have to imagine the Royal Navy sitting there thinking, this is a war build class. This is a light cruiser. And it becomes the basis for which all cruisers are defined. Thanks to this, the Washington Treaty of 1922. And there are a lot more articles than we normally talk about. When normally we talk about cruisers and Washington Naval Treaty, we talk about Article 11. No vessel of war exceeding 10,000 tons standard displacement other than a capital ship or aircraft carrier shall be acquired by or constructed by, for, or within the jurisdiction of any of the contracting powers. Vessels not specifically built as fighting ships nor taken in time of peace under government control for fighting purposes, which are employed on fleet duties or as troop transports, or in some other way for the purpose of assisting in the prosecution of hostilities, otherwise than as fighting ships, shall not be within the limitations of this article. Article 12. No vessel of war other than contracting powers hereafter laid down, other than a capital ship, shall carry a gun of a caliber in excess of 8 inches. Article 14. No preparations shall be made in merchant ships in time of peace for the installation of warlike armaments for the purpose of converting such ships into vessels of war, other than that necessary for stiffening decks and mounting of guns not exceeding 6-inch caliber. Article 15. No vessel of war constructed with the jurisdiction of any the contracting powers for a non-contracting power shall exceed limitations as to disarmament, placement, and armaments prescribed by the present treaty for vessels of a similar type, which may be constructed by or for any of the contracting powers, provided, however, that the displacement for aircraft carriers constructed for a non-contracting power shall in no case exceed 27,000 tons standard displacement. Article 16. If the construction of any vessel of war for the non-contracting power is undertaken within the jurisdiction of any of the contracting powers, such power shall promptly inform the other contracting powers of the date of the signing of the contract and the date at which the keel of the ship is laid, and shall also communicate to them the particulars related to the ship prescribed in Chapter 2, Part 3, Section 1B, Section 1B, 4, and 5. Article 17. In the event of the contracting power being engaged in war, such power shall not use a vessel of war in any vessel of war which may be under construction within its jurisdiction for any other power, or which may be have been constructed within its jurisdiction for another power and not delivered. Article 18. Each of the contracting powers undertakes not to dispose by gift, sale, or any mode of transfer of any vessel of war in such a manner that such vessel may become vessel of war in the navy of any foreign power. Okay, you're sitting there going, why does this matter? Well, Article 18 means you can't pass your cruisers off to your dominions. Which is annoying for Britain, because that's traditionally where the older cruisers went to still provide worthwhile duty on foreign stations. Let's see. Article 17. Theoretically, it's supposed to stop mainly the British doing what they did at the beginning of World War One, which really annoyed the Americans because the British basically took up all the destroyers, every ship in construction in their yards, and claimed them as their own. Please note, we did exactly the same in World War Two. We'd signed a document 3 times which said we weren't supposed to do that. And I know technically it lapsed in 1936, 37, but 3 times we'd signed a treaty saying we wouldn't do that. Honestly. Dib dib dobs. And we did. Every single time. Without fail. Article 16. Well, that is a way to crimp construction and using foreign construction to keep your own yards going. Because, as we're going to be talking about soon, if you want to build your cruiser to your own standards, which might be slightly bigger than those allowed by a contracting power, you have to build them in your own yards, whereas traditionally Britain has got by with building them in their yards. So this means you're exporting technology and construction know-how rather than importing money and keeping your own infrastructure going by construction. Yeah. These articles are direct attack on the British industry and British way of war. And how do I put this politely? I would like to say our politicians didn't understand what they were signing, but I'm sure they did. In terms of knowing it was going to have an impact. I don't think they understood how big an impact it was going to have. Article 15 adds a bureaucratic nightmare. It means everyone theoretically knows what you're doing. So if you're going to lie, you have to be good about it. Article 14. Well, this has an effect on our merchant cruisers. It's one of the reasons why they're all using old World War I era 6-inch guns in World War II. You're not allowed to fit them with anything else. You can't put anything else on them. Article 12. And, well, Article 11, there's your 10,000 tons. Here's something interesting. Pre and during World War One, the RN's ideas and designs for heavy cruisers kept orientating themselves around 15,500 tons to 18,000 tons. They were usually armed with 9.2-inch guns. In fact, as a rule, and this is thanks to UAD, Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, I would say they wouldn't have looked too dissimilar to this. This is one of the designs I have put together. One of the interesting things with UAD is you can't actually build one with forward super firing turrets, so I couldn't test out that idea. But I did a Dreadnought configuration. And one of the designs is literally described as a Dreadnought heavy cruiser. 9.2-inch guns. Twin turrets. I have some interesting theories when it comes to ships with. One of the interesting things is you get the designs and they're called E2s. And then you look at the figure. You look at some of the figures put around something like the E3, which is one of the designs that was being looked at, and you start to wonder whether the treble turrets are coming in again. I am starting to wonder because G3s, N3s, M3s, F3s, all of them was given the free designation. All of them have treble turrets. You start to wonder whether designs with 3 of them are treble turrets. They're not, but it does get you thinking. But honestly, this is what the Royal Navy is roughly thinking about as a heavy cruiser. the 18,000 tons with armor, 15,500 tons without armor. 10, 8, 10, sometimes possibly 12, 9.2-inch guns. So this is what the RN is thinking about when they are thinking about a heavy cruiser. Not this. This is not a heavy cruiser. So this, which is written in light of the cruiser the RN are building, is an issue. Because immediately the RN is not able to build what they want to build. The RN is not building a heavy cruiser. They are building light cruisers. This is one of the reasons why I have said in other videos, and I have got some pushback on this, which is why I think it's coming. My idea and my argument that the heavy cruisers in World War II are the light cruisers of World War One evolved. And the light cruisers in World War II are the scout cruisers of World War One evolved. And that when we look at things like the Alaska class, what we are seeing are the real heavy cruiser ideas. And here is the thing, the Alaska class is made a lot of fun of because of it comes late in the war, what's its point, all those things. But if you'd had, let's say, each navy in the world was allowed well, let's say they did a matching thing. You're allowed 18 capital ships, 18 heavy cruisers, and 18 whatever we'll call a 10,000-ton cruisers. Or a sort of medium cruisers, let's call them. Or those 10,000 tons, Hawkins class, are the upper limits of light cruisers, are 10,000 tons with these guns, but you're also allowed 18, 20,000 ton heavy Navy was building at the time. And that's what the third thing was put at. You would suddenly have a very different scenario. Because, yes, you would probably have to set the limitations for your battleships at 40,000 tons. And we can all imagine what a 40,000 ton Nelson and Rodney would look like. And the kind of things they would get up to. They probably would have been fast battleships. Because if you've got an extra 7,000 tons to play around with, you can probably crank them up to 28 plus knots. And still keep that armor. Without worrying about things. And then you would still have clear water between yourself and the heavy cruisers. You probably have to, interesting enough, you probably have the aircraft carriers round up to 30,000 tons, which could be again a limit. Because the interesting thing is, if they're not limited to 27,000 tons, they're limited to 30,000 tons. That extra 3,000 tons, if you're talking about building HMS Ark Royal, well, that can make HMS Ark Royal look kind of like an armored carrier, because they could build her the same as pretty much they built her, but they could give her some armoring and still keep up her speed and her size. At which point, you probably don't have the British government arguing for reducing in the size of carriers, and then the illustrious class, you probably have them saying, let's maintain the 30,000 ton limit. You also then have a knock-on effect on Japanese and American construction, but we'll leave that to one side. And expect the limitations expect the total limitations to be adjusted to reflect the numbers based on those bigger figures. Then you'd have the heavy cruisers, 20,000 ton limit. We can all imagine what ships can be built on 20,000 tons. And then you'd have your light cruisers limited to 10,000 tons. And then you'd probably have your destroyers down below. I'd probably say they'd keep the limitations roughly the same. Probably still roughly 2,000 tons. Because they like that as a limitation for them. And it provides clear boundaries of what's cruiser tonnage and what's destroyer tonnage. That would have had a big impact. The reason the RN doesn't build these versus it does build the Hawkins class? Quite simple. They have enough battle cruisers in service. They have renown, repulse. They have courageous, glorious, and furious for what they're worth. They have all the pre-war armored cruisers, which are fine. They don't need to replace those. We're talking ships which are mostly a decade and a half old. They don't need to replace them at the moment. And they're not getting that heavily used by the war in comparison to what they could be. So they don't need to deploy them. So the Royal Navy doesn't build these. But I can imagine there was a fair number of admirals looking back going, because that could have made a massive difference. So what's the concept for the counties? Because what are these ships? These ships are supposedly the new heavy cruisers, but to the Royal Navy's thinking they are large light cruisers. They are Atlantic light cruisers. They are treaty cruisers. What are they built to replace? Well, honestly, mostly they're replacing the things like HMS Duke of Edinburgh there, as she goes out of service in the early 1920s. The Royal Navy loses their station flagships. They lose their big presence ships. It costs a lot of money to maintain a battleship or a battle cruiser far away from infrastructure. There is a reason they are based with the Mediterranean Squadron and with the Home Fleet. They do visits, but they don't spend forever out there because there isn't the money to support them out there. If you have them firmly based out there, you need to rotate the crews out there. You need to rotate the logistics out there. You need to do the dry docking out there. All those require quite large and specialist facilities. You can build up facilities that you can use in wartime when you have the budget and you can shift the stuff out there to support it. But using it in peacetime, that's going to be expensive. And politicians of any hue, of any government, don't tend to like spending that sort of money in foreign soil, even if that foreign soil is part of your empire. They don't. So the counties are the big status ships coming in. They are going to be station flagships. They're going to be big, powerful, cornerstone ships. Only one class will have all of its planned members built, and that is going to be the London subclass. Of the Kents, 7 of 10 will be built. Of the Norfolks, 2 of 5 will be built. Of the Yorks, that famous diminutive subclass, 2 of 5 will be built. 2 so different they could actually be their own individual subclasses. In other words, you can say over the course of the program, The Royal Navy plans at various points to build 24 vessels. And only 15 actually get built. Why does the Royal Navy plan for this? Why do they keep wanting to build more of these ships? They never actually were planning to build 24 at any important point. The plans and ideas for what ships they'll change and how the groups they'll make up change as it goes on. But the reasoning behind it is all of that. This lovely Gordon 2007 map of the British territories from naval history, not net. They have all these stations, and you have battleships and battle cruisers in two of them. All the rest need flagships. They need a heavy presence. They're going to be filled up with C-class cruisers, and D-class cruisers and E-class cruisers are going to be doing their most of the lifting and the numbers. And for goodness sake, even the fricking Hawkins class will be doing their jobs. But they need something with more muscle. Again, I'm just imagining the Royal Navy sitting there going, if we'd been building the 9.2-inch cruisers, the limit would have been set at 10 inches for the heavy cruisers. You just needed to have 3 or 4 of them in production. And actually, you could have started off your class with with a heavy cruiser designation and a light cruiser designation in the Washington Treaty. When honestly, the Americans are going for the best they can get, but they actually go a bit far. Let's be honest, when we're talking about the Washington Naval Treaty, you should always remember the Americans are doing a lot of intelligence gathering, and especially on focusing on the Japanese, and they push hard to give the Japanese the minimum of what they will agree to, which, to a certain mind, sounds sensible. Oh, that's the minimum they'd agree to, so yeah, that's good. They push them. But that meant they went back home and all the politicians couldn't present any victories to their domestic audience. It's one of those things where you go, yeah, we've won. We've won another world war. The trick would have been to make sure both Britain and Japan went home with wins. The British certainly did go home with some wins. Not as many as they'd have liked, and that's mainly thanks to their own diplomacy, I think, rather than the Americans tapping into the British. But the Americans were trying to hack into the British and what their communications were as well. But if the Americans had allowed the Japanese a couple of wins, they could have been very successful. And I think actually the heavy cruisers are the area where there could have been wins handed out. Because if you have a numerical advantage in capital ships and a numerical advantage in light cruisers, and let's say you set it up so, well, as I said, you have matching numbers of heavy cruisers, but you go to Japanese, well, look, the 7-10 ratio, or the 3-5 ratio, that's a little bit on. We can understand your issue on this one, and yes, we've both got 20, and you're allowed 12, but we understand you have a lot of commerce. You're an island nation. You need to protect. How about on heavy cruisers, we give you a 4-5 ratio. So you get 16 of those. And they get to go home and go, yeah, we didn't win the capital ship one, but no, they were never going to give us that. But we won the heavy cruisers. That would be the pride of the Japanese fleet for many years. They'd be building the heavy cruiser like anything. We can all think of how that would affect World War II. But the point is, the concept for the counties is they've got to step up and fill up the role of the armored cruisers. They've got to fill up and be the station flagships. And they've got to do this while being on a budget which the Royal Navy originally ascribed to a large light cruiser. If you think there were a lot of designers in the Royal Navy going, ouch, you'd be not surprised. Also, the difficulty of that task is one of the reasons why it's quite such a gap between those sort of ships being withdrawn from service and the counties actually being laid down, because they go through many permutations of design and consideration to work them out. Many, many. So, here is the design and some stats for the Kent class. Displacement, 10,400 tons on average as standard. 14,150 tons average fully loaded. Yep, they go up 3,700 and, well, odd tons. Their length, 190 meters overall, but 180 meters on the perpendiculars. Beam, 21 meters across the bulges, the torpedo bulges put in. And draft. Standard, 5.26 meters. And fully loaded, 6.6 meters. Now they have 8 Admiralty free drum boilers supplying 4 shafts through Parsons, although Brown Curtin's turbines in Berwick, geared steam turbines with 80,000 shaft horsepower for a top speed of 31.5 knots. Now, interesting enough, Berwick, with her Brown Curtis steam turbines, seems to do occasionally a little bit better in performance reports than the others. Yeah. Brown Curtis did a very good job on the turbines for Berwick. And this is why I can say a top speed of 31.5 knots was the average top speed of this class. And certainly most of the Parsons steam turbine ships do get roughly 31.5 knots. But Berwick seems to occasionally peter out at a little bit more. Her turbines seem to be a bit more efficient, and there are recordings and some stats which suggest she got as high as 33.5 knots. I'm not sure about the truth of that. I do know that the Admiralty gets very attached to Brown and Curtis steam turbines for the next few years, which suggests they certainly do produce something better. She also tends to seem to have a slightly lower fuel consumption rate at her 10 knot speed. So she can do they can do 8,000 nautical miles or at 10 knots, or 2,300 nautical miles at 30 knots. Crew, as you can see, varies depending on whether it's flagship, when she gains an extra 25 personnel, or wartime, when she gains an extra 19, when they gain an extra 99. And of course, their main armament, 8 8-inch 50 caliber guns in 4 twin mounts Mark 1s, which allow them to go up to 70 degrees in firing and could be used for, therefore, AA work, but also for plunging fire. They have a multitude of 4-inch guns, 2-pounders. Berwick, again, was slightly different. She had 16 in 2 octuple mounts, whereas her sisters had 8 in 2 quad mounts for pom-poms, and 8 21-inch torpedoes in quad mounts. These were removed from 1935 onwards to save weight, basically, that can be used for other things. And the main belt, 4.5 inches, with 1-inch closing bulkheads, added from 1935 onwards. Not to all ships, but Berwick, Cumberland, Suffolk, Kent, and Cornwall managed to get them. They have a lower deck of 1.25 inches over over the machinery, and 1.5 inches over the steering gear to give them a little bit more protection. Basically, the idea was that whilst you had multiple machine spaces, you only had one real set of steering gear, so a little bit more protection was never a bad thing. Box citadels between 1 and 4 inches on the sides, and 1 to 2.5 inches on the crowns. And turrets had 1 inch all over. Now, the first thing I'd point out is, well, that's pretty damn light for something with heavy in its title. But, broadly speaking, in line with cruiser design of the pre-war period and the wartime period for the large light cruisers. It's a good design. It's a flexible design. And this is the point. The counties are good ships. But again, I would argue, whilst they are heavy cruisers in terms of treaty, the Royal Navy doesn't necessarily approach them as heavy cruisers. When I compare them with other navies and their approach to their cruisers, there is part of me which thinks that the large light cruiser of the Hawkins class designation lingers in the counties. There is also the fact, as we know, that they just magically seem to have space for more armor plates, and that armor plate seems to just be somewhere around. Okay? Britain and the treaties have an interesting relationship. The British approach to ship design is just as interesting. And there is often part of me which does think what would have happened if war had been delayed from 1939 to 1942, 1943-ish, whether or not some really interesting heavy cruisers, as the Royal Navy seems to understand them and think of them, would have appeared. But they don't. They don't. And I'll get onto that at the end when we're discussing in part 8. But for part 1, this is the design. This is the county class. They are heavy cruiser by treaty standards. They are large light cruiser by genesis of their forebear, the Hawkins. And they are what the Royal Navy would like to equip a lot of its Commonwealth allies, well, its Dominion and Commonwealth Empire, Dominion, Commonwealth allies with. The initial concept was to order 17 of the Kent class to fit the Australians, the South Africans, the Canadians, and New Zealanders. So all of them would end up with some ships. The Royal Navy would get the number, the vast majority, but probably about 9. But about 8 would go out in 4 pairs. Because the Royal Navy is thinking along this lines of, it's good if they have heavy cruisers. You also have to remember that the Washington Treaty isn't as prescriptive as later treaties. So there are arms limitations, there are numerical limitations in terms of size. But it isn't as limiting as the 1930 London Naval Treaty. Okay? It's nowhere near as limiting as that. And again, that's another treaty which is a good example of how to bring about a war. Because you run the system so that no one goes away feeling like they've won anything. And the reason they go away not feeling they've won anything is because you're building on the Washington Treaty where they didn't win anything. And you don't want to rewrite it. So you either go away as a nation if you're like Italy and Japan and cheat shamelessly, or in Japan's case, do not cheat enough, or you write in your cheats like Britain does, or you rely on your industrial mass like America does to build yourself out of the problems of it. But I cannot overemphasize that I want you to think large, light cruiser. That is what we're dealing with. Large, light cruiser. Oh, there she is. There's HMS Kent. As built and as she became. She had an interesting history. She's laid down in November 1924. She's launched in March 1926 and commissioned in June 1928. She's assigned immediately to the 5th Cruiser Squadron. That's the China station. Rather like the Talent classes would be on her when they come into service, and would spend the bulk of the interwar years there. In 1929 to 1930, she received the high angle control system to direct her anti-aircraft guns and had an aircraft catapult fitted. Her armament was reinforced by the addition of 2 more single 4-inch guns abreast the forward funnel in 1932 to 3. In 1934, while serving as flagship of Admiral Sir Frederick Dreyer, she attended the Far Eastern Naval Conference in Singapore together with Terror, Veteran, Wren, and Eagle. At the conclusion of the conference, Dreyer transferred his flag to Suffolk and Kent was sent to the United Kingdom for a refit. During 1934, the refits included 2 quadruple Vickers 50 cal machine guns added to further increase her air defence. In 1937, she'd return to Chatham again and undergo a major refit. This included 4.5 inches of crump cemented armour belt abreast the engine and boiler rooms being fitted. And this is in 1937, so remember, the treaty has ended, and suddenly the armour appears! It's amazing. We didn't have it in a stockpile, but no. We just had all this beautiful armour just sitting around. It's fitted in the engine boiler rooms, the dynamo room, and the fire control transmitting station. The belts extended 6 feet down from the lower deck, and 4 inches armor were also added to protect the sides of the boiler room's fan compartments. The ship's aft director was moved to a pedestal above the sea searchlight tower that replaced the original aft control station, and 2 octuple barrel 2-pounders mounts are added abreast the searchlight tower. Well, hey, this finally gets her up to a level equivalent to Berwick. Now, no aircraft hangar is added because officially that would have pushed her over naval treaty limits. Although her catapult is replaced with a more powerful one, capable of handling the heavier supermarine walrus flying boat. Useful. But again, the Washington Naval Treaty is having a long-reaching effect. In November 1939, Kent joined with the French cruiser Suffren, a very nice itself, heavy cruiser, and HMS Voyager and HMAS Vampire of the Royal Australian Navy. She was in the East Indies, and her job was to hunt down the Grass Bay. We can all imagine what would happen to Grass Bay had she come across that particular task group. Let's see, 2 heavy cruisers, and 2 Australian destroyers. When Italy declares war, she's transferred to the Mediterranean Fleet and arrives in Alexandria in August 1940. Joins with 3rd Cruiser Squadron, and I think it's still in August 1940, Kent, along with Warspite, Malaya, Ramillies, and 12 destroyers, bombarded Italian positions at Bardia and Fort Capuzzo. 2 weeks later, the ship took part in Operation Hats, escorting a convoy from Alexandria to Malta. In September 1940, she, along with Valiant, HMS Illustrious, and the anti-aircraft cruisers Calcutta and Coventry, plus 7 destroyers, left Alexandria and took part in attack on Benghazi, where Illustrious first mined the harbour, and then Kent and 2 destroyers would attach to bombard Bardia, while the force was returning to Alexandria. She was during that bombardment, she was actually attacked in the stern and hit by a torpedo from a SM-79. Was Italian, from the 279th Independent Torpedo Squadron, led by Carlo Emanuele Buscaglia, a noted Italian aviator. She was towed back to base by the destroyers, basically going, "You brought this on yourself. You actually got hit by an Italian in the stern. We're not sure whether to be embarrassed for you or, love you because you survived." And getting hit by torpedoes is going to be a part of her career, basically. She is going to have it happen to her a fair amount of times. And survive. Let's see. She's given temporary repairs in Alexandria, then returns to the UK. She gets more extensive repairs at Devonport Dockyard. That takes till September 1941. At this point, she receives radars and Oerlikon 20mm AA guns, and things like the 284, 285, and 281 radars added in. And when her repairs are completed in 1941, she spends several months working up, because after you repair the ship doesn't mean it's already. It's got all this new technology added in. It takes time to function the ship in together. It's therefore December 1941 when she sails from Scapa Flow, carrying Anthony Eden, then the Foreign Secretary, and the Soviet ambassador to Great Britain, Ivan Mayersky, to Murmansk, which she reaches on the 12th of December, 4 days later. Diplomats therefore disembark from there to meet Joseph Stalin, and Kent, on 17 December, along with 2 Soviet destroyers, decides to go and try and intercept the German 8th Destroyer Flotilla, which was engaging some British minesweepers, attempting to rendezvous with the convoy PQ-6. They failed to meet the bump up with the Germans, unfortunately. Although that could have been a very cool battle if it had happened, HMS Kent, 2 Soviet destroyers versus the 8th Destroyer Flotilla. That would have been a battle. Well, it would have been a bit of a battle royale, but it would also have possibly. Let's put it this way: a battle like that, a scenario like that, could have had a real impact on A, post-war Soviet construction, and B, post-war Anglo-Soviet relations. And also, just imagine the propaganda that Stalin and the British would have got out of that kind of battle. HMS Kent, 2 Soviet destroyers destroying a German fleet. We all know it was a destroyer flotilla, but by the time it got out with the propaganda team, it would have been the mass German fleet. It would have been Bismarck resurrected and Tirpitz that would have been taken on and destroyed. Kent would have been transformed from a mere county-class cruiser into this almighty battleship for Britain. Who knows? We'll leave it at one side. Anyway, she's assigned then to the home fleet and carries on escorting convoys to and from Russia. QP8, QP10. She attempts to try and recover Trinidad before she sunk, but Trinidad sunk, and before she can get there. And even PQ-16, she's part of the close escort for that. She's refitted in Liverpool between July and November 1942. Her catapults finally removed. The quadruple 50 caliber machine guns are finally removed, and they fit some more Oerlikons, 20mm Oerlikons. Oh, finally. In January 1943, she covers Convoy RA-51, and a few weeks later than that, Convoy JW-52. While on this mission with JW-52, she's unsuccessfully attacked by U-625, and then has a brief refit in Chatham between September and October, where she exchanges her single 20mm mounts for twin 20mm mounts, because someone goes, hang on. It's good. 2 is better. Yeah. And then she covers more convoys. In July 1944, she forms part of the covering force protecting 3 British aircraft carriers, which are attacking Tirpitz during Operation Mascot. The Royal Navy's finally learned you do not have carriers wandering around the North Sea without having a cruiser with them. And she does it again in September when she escorts 2 carriers attacking German shipping in Stadt. And in November 1944, she is the flagship for Rear Admiral Roderick McGregor during Operation Counterblast, where she, along with Bellona and 4 destroyers, attacks convoy KS 357 of Lichfield. It's not far from Norway. It's a rather similar experience to that which took place during the attack on Taranto when the Royal Navy decided to wander up into the Adriatic. In that, the freighters and the escort basically don't survive. She's paid off in 1945 and remains in reserve until she's used as a target. She's the first of the counties to be struck off the naval list and eventually allocated to Biscoe and then Troon in January 1948. And she's gone. It's rather sad. Honestly, she's a good ship, and so when she goes, was laid down in 1924, and she is sold for scrap in 1948. Okay, I'm not on Iron Brew, but I'm allowed the milkshakes. Now, this is going to be interesting because this is actually going to come out on the 5th of January, and I do apologise, but that's because I wanted to re-record it because it's gone up to 8 parts overnight. I recorded this when there were 7 parts originally, and now it's gone to 8 parts, and I think it's going to stay at 8 parts. So this is going to go out on the 5th of January, rather than the 4th. But also on the 5th is going to go part 2, because what I've done is I divided it up into 5 months, and there's going to be 1 to 2 parts coming out the first week of each month. January, February, March, April, and May. And I hope you're going to enjoy it. Basically, things like when I was doing the April one, which is York, Exeter, and the Canaries class, I decided that I'm taking 2 parts. The Norfolk class comes with an entire section on how cruisers are involved with the 1930 London Naval Treaty and how that impacts things. And, there's the London class comes with some interesting side benefits as well. So, I hope you enjoy. I hope you're going to find the counties interesting. And thank you for watching. Take care. Enjoy.